Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Deborah Woolen, and I'm your host this evening for Inside Scoop. I want to start tonight's show with drawing a picture for our viewers of six kids specifically, six young people. So when I say six, I want you to visualize six kids at the playground or six young people standing in front of their favorite store in the mall, or six kids standing, in a school hallway talking about their favorite video game. So in that imagining, I'm sure you saw your children or your grandchildren or your nieces or your nephews. So with that visual, I want to also draw a picture of the fact that six young people die every day in this country to gun violence. In that imagining, I'm sure you saw the faces again of your family members, and I hope that draws a connection. It tugs at your heart a little bit of the problem that we have in this country when it comes to gun violence. So tonight I have with us two very special people. We're going to talk about gun violence prevention policy in this country and what we can do for reform. We have with us Martina Leinz, the president of Brady Nova, or Nova Brady, and Lori Haas of the Center for Gun Violence Solutions. So Martina and Lori, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So before we get started, we're really getting into policy reform and what people really need to know when it comes to, it's so easy to say common sense gun reform, right? And we think like if it was so common sense, if it was so easy, what's the problem? So, but before we get into that, let's talk about how you both came to be where you are right now. So, Martina, let's start with you with how you got to Nova Brady.
Sure. Thank you, Deborah. And thanks
Sure.
for having us on the show tonight. So I became involved in this movement in May of 2000 at the very first Million Mom March for Gun Violence Solutions. And in the years since, I've become active at both the local, state, and federal level to bring about the needed change, both through laws and through policies and through education. And through that work, I became involved with Brady and got to meet my colleague Lori here through the work as well. And together we are fighting with literally thousands of other foot soldiers for the gun violence prevention movement.
Awesome. Fantastic. Okay, and Lori, how did you get to where you are right now?
Personal connection to gun violence. Sadly, my daughter was shot and injured at Virginia Tech on April 16th, 2007, along with 32 students and staff that were killed that day, and another 17 students who were shot and injured, and another 7 students who jumped out a second-story window to save their lives and were injured. So it was a seminal moment in Virginia's history, and somewhat in the history of the gun violence prevention movement. It ushered in an era of mass shootings that we see to this day, and I began working. I went on the Hill. My very first visit was with some of the Brady folks, and since then I've been working on this issue. I worked for a nonprofit for many years, and we recently merged with the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solution, where I work now. But I do this work through other organizations in the Commonwealth of Virginia, various on-the-ground groups in different locations in Charlottesville and Roanoke and Hampton Roads and Richmond and Nova, and work across an array of stakeholders.
Sure. So let's get into it. So if it's so common sense, what is the issue? What are the holdups? I know before we came on air, we were talking about risk orders and how they lead to what we call red flag laws. Let's talk about that. Like what's the holdup?
Well, we've had great success with risk orders across the country. They were similar laws existed in the state of Connecticut and the state of Indiana, and we were trying to get similar laws in place in other states across the country. These are very narrowly tailored. They're very similar to domestic violence protective orders, or restraining orders as some states call them. They take a person who's at risk of violence and disarm them. It's temporary in nature. There's civil orders. There's no criminal record. There's no over incarceration. It just simply recognizes when a person is at risk of harm, possibly to self, possibly to others, then law enforcement officers and other stakeholders in the community, sometimes treatment providers in some states, Commonwealth's attorneys and others in positions of authority, can go in front of a judge. It's a judicial process, get a risk order, and temporarily disarm a person, again, who's at risk of harm to self or harm to others. They're viable, they're workable, and they're happening all across the country. We're now up to, I think, 21 states, and the District of Columbia have these laws, including Virginia. And in Virginia, we're seeing, some robust use of risk orders in some jurisdictions and not so robust in other jurisdictions.
Gotcha. So Martina, can you talk a bit about safe storage laws and how Virginia is doing in that vein?
Sure. Maybe to segue from the risk order to safe storage, one of the most compelling arguments for why we need to have these red flag laws is that there have been instances, if you can think back to a shooting that happened at UC Santa Barbara, where the parents of a disturbed young man knew he had guns, knew he was a risk, either to himself or to others, or both, sought help from the police. They wanted to separate him from his guns, but they didn't have a mechanism with which they could do that. So these red flag laws are vitally important. It gives law enforcement a tool, it gives families a tool. It's not impeding on anybody's right to own a gun because it's an adjudication process, right? It has to happen that way, and it's only temporary. But that leads to this whole concept of safe storage. And how do you responsibly behave as a gun owner? If you're a gun owner and you have somebody in the house with you that you know might be suicidal or might have ideation of, venerating people who have carried out mass shootings, as horrific as that thought is, there are people like that out there. If you know this, you have a responsibility to make sure that they can't access your firearms. But even if you're not, if you're just in a regular American household with 2 parents and a couple of kids, if you're going to own guns, you have to keep them locked, unloaded, and with the ammunition stored completely separately from the firearm. And one of the main reasons why this is so important is we know now that the #1 killer of children, of youth and teens and little kids in this nation, the #1 killer is guns. And oftentimes it's suicide, and oftentimes it's unintentional shootings, which some people mistakenly call accidental. There's nothing accidental if a kid accesses a gun. And so if you are going to own guns, and if you properly store them and keep them, then you reduce the risk that this will happen. So we just really, really encourage people to think about that. Unfortunately, the gun manufacturing industry has brainwashed a lot of people to think that they need to have a gun loaded and ready and on their nightstand so they can protect their home. But the reality is the data shows that you are far more likely that that gun is going to injure you or a family member than it is going to stop an intruder.
Sure. And I do want to talk about that. Like, again, it just seems like it just makes sense for us to have for us to have laws that will protect us from gun violence. But before we get into that, again, before the show, we talked about the fact that firearm suicide is actually rising among Black young people.
Yes, there's the CDC annually summarizes gun deaths and gun injuries, firearm injuries in this country. The 2022 provisional data is out. It's not been confirmed. It'll be confirmed sometime in January or February of 23. But that data shows the trend continuing, i.e. firearms are the #1 killer of children in this country. And in taking a deep dive into the data, colleagues at the School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins did an analysis, and there is a terrible trend among firearm suicides increasing among African American youth and other youth. So it is a dire situation. As Martina said, you know, what we need for parents to do is lock up their firearms. I liken it to child safety seats. When we first passed laws to require a parent to strap their child into a safety seat, it was like, oh, these laws aren't going to work. They weren't. They were based in data. They were based in fact. You lock up you strap your child into a safety seat, and they're protected from a car accident, and lives were saved. This is the same thing. The public health data points us in the right direction. Lock up your firearms. It reduces access by children, reduces who often it's an accident, unintentional shooting, but it can reduce firearm homicides and firearm suicides among our youth. It is a terrible, terrible stain on us as humans and as a society that we know what the number one killer of children is in this country. More than cancer, more than drowning, more than car accidents. And what are we doing about it?
Right.
And I think it's immoral that we're not doing enough about it.
Absolutely. For example, the issue, well, not the issue, but the shooting that happened in Tennessee earlier this year, and how the lawmaker came out and said, well, you know, it's not going to change. How hopeless is that? That's why we put elected officials in place so that they can make change. So what was your organization's response when he came out and made that statement?
Well, of course, it was infuriating, and nothing is hopeless. And this is a country that is supposed to practice democracy, and the will of the people is clearly for common sense solutions. The overwhelming majority of people, even among gun owners, want some of these common sense measures. It is really only the gun manufacturing industry and the lobbying associations that represent them that argue against it. So, you know, we don't have the luxury of being able to equivocate about that, right? We know it's a fact. Guns are killing people needlessly.
Absolutely. Please make sure you come back. Don't go anywhere as we continue our conversation with Martina Leinz and Lori Haas regarding common sense gun violence prevention, the number one killer of young people in our country. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
There. Can I tell you a cat joke? Just kidding. Why did the girl ask the mushroom to dance? Because he was a fun guy. What do you call a pig that knows karate? Pork chop. Why was the basketball court all wet? Why? Because the players kept dribbling all over it. Can I tell you another one? So how does a tissue dance? Put a little boogie on it. What's Beethoven's favorite fruit? Banana. What is a boxer's favorite drink? Fruit punch.
Mom, I got it. What are you doing in there?
I got stuff.
Are you a dog?
I wouldn't do that. Have you seen the pliers? Where'd you find those?
It's not your birthday.
Sorry.
Bye, Grandpa.
Bye, Grandpa.
Take care of yourself.
What are you doing? What are you looking for?
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again your host.
Thank you so much for joining us again, coming back on Inside Scoop as we continue our discussion regarding gun violence prevention. So Martina and Lori, before we left, we were talking about safe storage and its impact on suicide prevention. So talk a bit more about that. Like, it just makes sense that if you keep someone from being able to access a firearm, then that could keep them from harming themselves. So what do you say to people who say things like, well, guns don't kill people, people kill people?
So we know that a lot of people who attempt suicide it's an impulse decision. And if you can do something to create a barrier between the method they may use to kill themselves, then they won't complete this terrible task. So if you lock up the gun, and if the ammunition is stored separately so that they would have to take all of those steps, chances are in the amount of time that it took them to assemble that gun, that moment of thinking, I want to kill myself, has passed. So I just think it's so important that people think about that. There is nothing more heartbreaking than talking to a father who did not keep his firearm locked up. He kept it in his desk drawer, and his 13-year-old son, on the worst day of his life, took the gun and killed himself. And the father has to live with that guilt. It's senseless and unnecessary. All the father had to do was lock up the gun.
Absolutely. Lori?
I couldn't agree more. And again, it should be common sense. It should be, first nature, not even second nature, for someone who's a gun owner who has children in the home to lock up his or her firearms. But sadly, we don't see that. Just like we had to have, the child safety seat laws, you must strap your child into a safety seat. We need laws that compel gun owners to lock up their firearms, because they're not doing it. Clearly they're not, when the death rate among children from suicide and homicide and accident and other is so high. We need laws that compel and require gun owners to lock up their firearms when children are present in the home. Whether you're a parent, a guardian, an aunt, or a grandparent, if a child is in the home and you're a firearm owner, you must lock it up. One other stat that I find very compelling is up to 80% of school shooters get their gun at home or the home of a relative or neighbor. So let's think about that. If they were all locked up, don't you think it would stop the number of firearms being brought into schools? I think it's, telling, that stat, and I think it is common sense and a law that we should have in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Absolutely, and we're going to talk about Virginia in a second, but you're right. So when seatbelts were being enforced, there was pushback against that, but data showed it would save lives. And then you mentioned child restraints. There was pushback against that, but data showed it would save lives. So again, we're telling people, hey, we need more barriers when it comes to people having access to guns. Why? Because data shows it'll save lives. So how are we doing in Virginia when it comes to laws and policy and our policymakers? How are we doing?
Well, we have had some great success in Virginia in the past administration under Governor Northam, and a very robust General Assembly that passed meaningful reforms. And I'll pass it off to Lori to talk about this.
Yes. Under the Northam administration, the governor himself was determined and committed to working on gun violence prevention. He talked about it in his campaign, he ran on it, and frankly, he won on the issue, as did his lieutenant governor and attorney general at the time. Dozens of laws were passed in the Commonwealth in the 2020 Virginia General Assembly session and in the 2021 session, a number of which are well known. We have background checks. We reinstated one handgun a month. We added protections for victims of domestic violence. Permanent protective orders are now gun prohibitory.
I'm sorry, before you move on, you said one gun a month. So are you saying that under all circumstances, if someone in Virginia wants to purchase a gun, they can only do one a month, or are there
exceptions? So let me clarify. Under then Governor Douglas Wilder in 1993, he passed the first one handgun purchase limitation in the country. It's a very successful, very progressive, and he was admired greatly for this policy. It was repealed under then Governor McDonnell, and then it was reinstated in 2020 under Governor Northam. A person is limited to one handgun per month purchase limitation. That's 12 annually, and there are exceptions for persons who are moving out of state or member of the armed services and there's a circumstance, or if your firearm is lost or stolen, or if you're security personnel or employed in an industry that requires you to have a firearm. So there are some exceptions, but that was just one, of several that we did. We also granted local authority to regulate firearms in certain circumstances in certain places. So a lot of jurisdictions in the Commonwealth prohibit firearms at city council meetings, for example, or at the city park, or during a permitted event when there's a farmer's market or a festival. We also passed a law in 2021 that prohibits firearms at polling locations. With the, rancor that we see politically in this country, it was smart and it was well worth it. We want our poll workers safe, and we want everybody to feel safe when they're going to the polls. We changed the default proceed from 3 days to 5 days. Law enforcement in the Commonwealth of Virginia State Police now have an added window of time to perform a background check to make certain that the applicant is not under arrest, under an indictment, a fugitive, some other perhaps interfacing with law enforcement that gives them pause, and that is hard to ferret out in a background check. The vast majority of background checks take about 3 minutes in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Wow.
3 minutes. But some of the laws that we've passed in 2020 and 2021 enhance overall safety. No firearms in state buildings, and lastly, no firearms in preschools and daycares. We didn't have a law that protected our youngest, and now we do.
That's awesome. I think one thing that's really frustrating is that you said something really poignant. You said it takes 3 minutes to perform a background check to purchase a gun. But if someone wants to apply for TANF, if someone wants to apply for housing, if someone wants to apply for any sort of assistance, it takes months. And then there's a repeated process to prove that you still need food, even though everyone knows if you don't eat, you will starve and die. And there's this repeated process of having to prove that you still need housing. Yeah. And even when it comes to a woman getting protection, like a restraining order, you have to prove that you need this protection. But it only takes 3 minutes for someone to purchase a firearm, at least in Virginia. So what has there, with this new administration, and I will say this, maybe you two can't say this, but when I saw the current lieutenant governor during the election process, when she had a poster of posing with an AR rifle, I was just like, are you kidding me? Especially being an African American woman, knowing how gun violence affects our community specifically. So are we at risk with any rollback? I know there have been rollback attempts, so let's talk about that and why people need to make sure they make it to the polls in November, starting with you, Martina.
Of course, thank you for the question. If you go back and take a look at what happened during the last General Assembly session, some of the bills that the House put forward were absolutely horrific. Not only rolling back all the great protections that were put into place, but really trying to advance sort of this fundamentalist philosophy of guns everywhere all the time with no restrictions. Thankfully, we had a Democratic majority in the Senate that was able to stop all those bad bills and to prevent the rollbacks from happening. I shudder to think what would have happened had we not had that firewall, because I guarantee you, had it not been there, those bills would have passed and Governor Youngkin would have signed them, and we would be living in a much more dangerous Virginia than we live in today.
Martina is so right. It is incumbent upon the voters in Virginia to select a candidate who is committed to gun violence prevention, work for that candidate, promote that candidate, and if you don't know where your candidates and where the candidates for elected office in the House and the Senate stand on this issue, ask the questions. Make sure you're educating yourself as a voter. Where do you stand on this issue? Do you support background checks? Do you support risk orders in the Commonwealth? Will you do more to promote safe storage and protect children and protect schools and protect our communities? You know, we saw attempts by the Republican to repeal all the laws and all the advances that happened during the Northam administration in 2020 and 2021. We saw them promote bills to get guns in churches and to allow permitless carry, i.e. anybody can carry a concealed handgun anywhere in the Commonwealth. You know, more guns in more places by more people and, you know, more high-powered guns, and we just oppose it. It is a fact that states with stronger gun laws have lower gun death rates. Their rate of death from guns is lower in states that have more and stronger laws. We want that for the Commonwealth. We want to protect our families, we want to protect our children, and we need to elect those who are committed to doing so and who are going to stop, you know, the gun lobby and their puppets in the Virginia General Assembly from making us, you know, the Wild West, in my opinion.
Exactly. I just want to go back to something that you said as far as there was legislation to stop, or no, I'm sorry. So when a Republican or Republicans put forth legislation to get guns in churches?
Yes, they have for numerous years now. Many, many years we've been fighting this along with some of our friends in the General Assembly, the Virginia Interfaith Center, and others to stop this. I'm not a...
If you are looking at this right now, if you are going to a church and you feel like you need a gun, just throw the whole worship team away, throw the pastor away, throw the pulpit away. You are in the wrong place. That is ridiculous. I cannot believe that. I mean, I can. It's preposterous. But going back to, again, something else that you said, is it really the NRA? Does the NRA really have Republicans and anyone else who is all the way to the right when it comes to gun policy? Do they really have them by the throat?
I think what has happened is, in my opinion, the gun lobby, the NRA and others have foisted a message among conservatives about you must fear, and to address that fear, you must buy a gun. But we can talk more about it.
We are going to talk about that, so make sure you don't go anywhere. You don't want to miss this conversation. We'll be right back.
Every day across America, excess food is gathered in a network of good people at local food banks, giving hope to millions of children who struggle with hunger. They've earned their wings, and you can too. Together, we can solve child hunger. Support Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org.
Hi, I'm Josh Temple. You might have seen me on TV where I help folks turn their houses into dream homes. But forget construction. Parenting is the toughest job there is. So when you need help or advice, turn to the parenting experts at Boys Town.
I was afraid of that.
Well, guess it's time to get you fixed.
Your pets will start fooling around sooner than you think.
Go on, get out of here!
Accidental litters lead to millions killed in shelters each year. Help prevent more. Fix at month 4.
Food. It nourishes, brings us together, and adds flavor to life. That's why it's important to wash hands, surfaces, and fresh produce. Keep raw meat, poultry, and seafood separate from ready-to-eat foods like fruits and vegetables. And cook to proper temperatures using a food thermometer. Enjoy, and refrigerate leftovers within 2 hours. For more tips on safely preparing foods, visit homefoodsafety.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back and joining us on the Inside Scoop as we're having a great, just riveting conversation about gun violence prevention. We were just talking about, I'll say this, I will go on the record as saying this. I was saying that in order to get anything that has gained the overall attention of the African American community, typically in this country, has always become regulated, even when it comes down to our music. So I have a theory that if a number of African Americans get interest or show interest in obtaining guns, in going to gun shows, in owning guns, then regulation will follow. And I have a data point for that. Research the correlation between the Black Panther Party and their activities and gun laws in this country. And I'm just going to leave it at that. If anyone has something to say, you can contact me on my email. I'm super accessible. But anyway, going back to what we were talking about in our previous segments, fear-mongering, and how that is behind some of the motives or the messaging with the NRA and how it has made its place into politics. So let's talk a bit about that, starting with you, Martina.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. However, they have discovered that fear-mongering, hatred, these are motivators for certain elements of our society, unfortunately. And they have them believing that they're not going to be safe from whether it's immigrants coming across the border or whatever else that they, have them fearing.
Sure.
That they have to have that loaded gun with them at all times. They have to carry it on them. They have to have it in their car. They have to have it everywhere. Wow. It's a very frightening statistic, but there are more guns in this country than there are people.
Wow. That's is that a fact?
That is a fact.
Goodness. Wow.
Now, what is interesting about that fact is that it is not a per capita situation. Mm-hmm. It's a concentrated group of people that have amassed a lot of firearms.
Wow, that is scary.
And that's scary.
Yeah, as if we're getting ready for, World War, whatever. Lori, your take on this?
Follow the money. They always say follow the money. The gun manufacturers are making money hand over fist, hand over fist, hand over fist, selling more firearms, more firearms. They have learned through trial and through, smart marketing that fear sells. And they try to foist upon many, many people, and gun owners and conservatives in particular, fear the other. Fear the other. Somebody who doesn't look like you, somebody who doesn't talk like you, somebody who doesn't dress like you, somebody who's a different color than you are, somebody who doesn't belong in your neighborhoods, the other. It should, this point of view that you're the only person who can protect yourself and you must fear the other, is tugging at some sort of, perspective and part of the persona, I think, of conservatives. And it has increased the inclination and the gravitation towards white supremacy and other actions that people are using their firearms on people, on innocent people. When somebody walks up and knocks on your door to ask for directions and you look out the window and it's a 16, 18-year-old African-American youth and your response is to shoot that child, that teenager, what is wrong in this country that is the response? But it's that fear-mongering that the gun lobby and the gun manufacturers are using to sell more guns. And it is endangering us all and our children, and in particular, people of color. It is unacceptable, and I find it disgusting on many, many levels.
So to that point, within our community, there is a desire to protect ourselves. Yes. And I have a number of friends that are responsible gun owners, and for that very reason, to protect their homes, to protect themselves when they're, walking down the street, walking their dog, just living their lives. But understanding that if you wear brown skin, in certain circumstances, you're seen as a threat.
Yeah.
So if we're having conversations, and actually I was sharing before the show that I was recently at a demonstration for silencers with a friend who is a responsible gun owner. So when we're having these conversations about responsible gun ownership, what are some talking points they can say for folks that perhaps are just all the way to the right when it comes to just extreme gun ownership, no matter what, under all circumstances? But for those who agree, well, yeah, we do need common sense gun reform. How can they intelligently speak to folks that are just really extreme with it? Martina.
You start.
Okay,
Okay. So first, I'm sure Lori shares this opinion with me, but it's important that we make a distinction between the rank and file NRA member and the NRA as an organization and their leadership. Their leadership is motivated by greed. They want to make money for the gun manufacturers. The rank and file NRA member, it might be very supportive of gun solutions, like agreeing that we should have background checks. So there is that distinction. And so I think that if you start from the premise that believing that most gun owners are responsible, then you just let those that maybe have an extreme view that there should be no restrictions understand that they may have been a little manipulated by the gun lobby, right? They were motivated because what we saw as we moved from a society where people lived in rural areas and maybe did a lot of hunting, as people stopped hunting, gun ownership per capita went drastically down. We lived in safer communities. People never felt the need to have a handgun at home for protection. So this was all part of a strategic plan by the NRA representing the gun manufacturers. If you can't increase the number of people who want to buy guns, what you have to do is increase the number of guns that the people that do have them have. Like, it's just a common tactic. If you can't find a new market, you find new products to sell to the same market. So that's essentially what we've seen. And sadly, that's why they worked so hard to get the assault weapons ban to block its renewal. So in 2004, that ban that we had that protected Americans for a decade from deaths by assault weapon expired. And since that time, that the number of mass shootings has just become, it's just unconscionable. A scary statistic, but a very real one, is that so far in 2023, we have had 222 days, if my math is right. We're 220 days into the year. Do you know how many mass shootings we've had?
How many?
420 as of this afternoon from the Gun Violence Archive tracking system.
Oh my gosh.
Almost double the number of days in the year. That's just unacceptable. And so I think if you present these statistics to sensible gun owners, they will agree that we've gone too far and that something needs to change. There is absolutely nothing inconsistent with believing and supporting the Second Amendment and having responsible limitations to gun ownership.
Absolutely.
Lori. It's, the fear-mongering is rampant and unnecessary. However, far be it from me to speculate or suggest that I have any idea how somebody feels, who grew up in disadvantaged because of the color of their skin or where they lived or what school they went to or any of those things. And, validating feelings is something that is human. We should do that. We should care about our fellow man. We should validate their feelings. So people make their own choices based on the information at hand, based on what their particular situation is. It's just incumbent upon people in the public health field, though, to share the data, to share the information. Firearms don't make you safer. They increase the risk of harm. When a firearm is in a home, it increases the risk of accident, injury, death by suicide, and death by homicide from that firearm to the people who live in that home, not from an outsider. So it's just really difficult to kind of square the data, you know, with the very real inclination of how am I going to take care of myself? How am I going to protect myself? How am I going to protect my family? And those threats in some communities are much greater and much more real and much more in your face than in other places. So I will, you know, just want to acknowledge that because of the, you know, advocacy that I do to promote more regulations about access to guns, who can carry, where they can carry, what type of firearm, and the notion that if more firearms made us safer, we would be the safest country in the world, and we're not. By many, 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 many times over, we are the most dangerous country when it comes to the risk of firearm death for children, for women, for people of color, and just generally. You could take the entire population of the United States and compare it to populations in other developed countries, and they just don't have the rates of firearm death that we do because they regulate access. You know, it's one thing to own a firearm, it's another to resist, say, a domestic abuser, somebody who's been convicted of domestic violence, a conviction in a court of law of domestic violence. We had people in the General Assembly vote against a prohibition. The premise we had was, if you've been convicted of a violent misdemeanor against a family or household member, you should be prohibited from firearm ownership for 3 years. Take a time out. You've acted on your violent tendencies. You've been convicted in a court of law. And people voted against that. We said, you know, children should not have access to firearms. They voted against that.
With what justification, do you know?
Because I need to have my gun. I need quick, easy access.
My 3-year-old can handle it. I mean, we heard that.
Yeah.
We heard that.
It's a fantasy and kind of a disconnect with, again, the public health data. You know, that firearms are deadly, lethal weapons. They increase lethality risk to any owner and anybody who's in the presence and company and lives with that firearm owner. They are deadly, lethal weapons.
Gosh, that segment went by so quickly.
Yes, it did.
So when we get back, I really want you all to share with the audience what they can do to get involved with your individual organizations to help bolster the message of gun violence prevention. So please make sure you come back and join us for our last segment on the Inside Scoop as we discuss gun violence prevention. See you soon.
I can't believe we broke Old Man Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do?
We? Go to the door, ask for the ball back.
Are you serious?
It's my ball, Myrtleback.
You're so dead. I'd run away.
Yeah, to Uruguay.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry.
Let's go. Yeah, never mean you're well.
Nice one. Some friends you are. Hi.
Hi.
Tell him it was an accident. And we can fix the window. Come on. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. One of some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice. Holy spice. So if the gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
Like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health
at seizetheawkward.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
And thank you so much for coming back and joining us on the Inside Scoop as we continue our conversation with Martina Leinz, president of Nova Brady, and Lori Haas from the Center for Gun Violence Solutions. So in this last segment, let's start off and let's talk about resources available for communities that are affected by gun violence. So starting with you, Lori.
We know that there are an array of solutions to gun violence. There's not a single fix. There's not a panacea that's going to fix this problem. We need a public health approach. We need to work on policy and changes in gun laws, but we also need to get resources into communities that are disproportionately affected by gun violence, often communities of color, not because of the color of their skin, but because of decades of systemic racism that have left them, with unfunded education opportunities, less than satisfactory housing, less than training and jobs, and health inequities. We saw that during COVID. So we've worked hard in the Commonwealth of Virginia under then Governor Northam to get some resources into these communities to fund hospital-based violence interruption programs, to get some monies into community programs and nonprofits. We got state agencies to be able to funnel monies not only to jurisdictions but to community programs, and we're still working on that. We had great success again in the early years of the Northam administration. The current budget, as offered by Senate Democrats, includes a nice chunk of change in the line item for funding for community programs for gun violence prevention, but we're not seeing movement on that budget from our leadership in Richmond. We also saw the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which passed in July of 2022, funded programs by public safety agencies in all of the states, most of this money earmarked for law enforcement to fight gun violence prevention. That could be through red flag laws and implementation and education on risk orders and red flag laws. It could be funding for mental health courts and other crisis intervention training for law enforcement. Sadly, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the Department of Criminal Justice Services applied for the money. They were awarded $5 million in February of 2023. That was going on almost 6 months ago. And yet the Youngkin administration has not taken that money. It is sitting at DOJ ready for the taking. And this is money that DCJS could disseminate to communities in places like the city of Richmond or Newport News or Norfolk or Roanoke, places that are suffering from higher rates of gun violence and could use those resources. I'm not sure what the administration is doing, why they've refused to take this money. It's free federal money sitting right now. All they have to do is say, yes, we'll take it. It's not right, and it is, ignoring some of these communities that need these funds.
And is that a task that your organization is taking on to kind of hold the Youngkin administration accountable? And if so, what can people do to?
Well, there are many people out there working and pleading with the administration. The mayor of Richmond, Mayor LeVar Stoney, just held a press conference, asking and tasking the folks in Richmond, the Youngkin administration included, fund more programming, give us more money to fight the scourge of gun violence in the city. And I know the other mayors in other jurisdictions would love this money. I know law enforcement agencies, they need this money, to help with this fight. So it's important that we approach gun violence with an array of strategies. We need policies, we need resources, we need on-the-ground programming and violence interruption. So let's hope that something can be done soon.
Sure. Martina.
Yes, I would just say to any of your viewers who are listening today and who are feeling frustrated, there's so much that you can do to really help this issue. And Lori just brought up a great one. Call the governor's office. Ask him, why on earth are you not accepting this $5 million that can be put to work to help our communities and to save our children? The other thing that people can do is to do their research and make sure they're voting for candidates in November that are going to vote the right way on these issues. And do vote. Voting is such an important thing. Another thing that individuals can do is, if they're gun owners, practice safe storage and make sure that everyone they know who is another gun owner does that. Even if you're not a gun owner, every parent, every adult supervisor of a child should always ask if there's a gun in the home where their children play. Don't assume that you're sending your child to play at a house where they practice safe gun storage. Ask, and don't be afraid to ask that. You can join others who are working on this issue. There's a very large group of us that meet on the 14th of every month in front of the NRA headquarters in Fairfax, Virginia. And we are there to protest the fact that the gun lobby stands in the way of sensible legislation. And so we meet, and we have met on the 14th of every single month since the terrible shooting in Sandy Hook Elementary in Newtown, Connecticut. So join us. It's always from 10 to 11 a.m. unless the 14th falls on a Sunday, and then it's from 2 to 3 p.m. Also, another action people can take, every year we celebrate the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on MLK Day. This year it's on January 15th, and we hold a vigil to commemorate him and to commemorate all the lives lost in the Commonwealth throughout the year. And then we take our passion and we go into the General Assembly buildings and the offices where the legislators are, and we meet with them to advocate for the laws that we would like to see passed. So I'm sure there are other things that Lori might want to add on to, but these are some of the things. If you like to write letters to the editor of your local newspapers, speak out on the issue. There are many, many different gun violence prevention organizations. So our local chapter is part of Brady United Against Gun Violence, which is the oldest gun violence prevention organization in the country. You can go to our website, find resources, find information on being involved. But there are many other wonderful organizations out there, and we all work together pretty closely to collaborate on issues, and so we pretty much work in unison.
Yeah. Do you find, before I come to you, Lori, do you find when it comes to folks joining you in front of the NRA headquarters after a tragic event that there's a swell of people?
Yes, and it's, people feel that they feel sadness and they feel frustration and they feel anger, and it helps to be in community with others who feel the same way. And it's something demonstrable that they can do. They can express everything that they're feeling by being in front of the NRA headquarters. And I think we're one of the most sustained, really, civil rights movements that there has been. I mean, every month for now 10 years without fail, even through COVID, even in snowstorms, even in the heat of summer, we are there.
Wow.
And we hope others will come and join us.
Absolutely. I think, oh gosh, I was going to say something. I forget. Go ahead, Lori, if you're going to add to it. It'll come back to me.
Well, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we've had robust action and movement and participation from groups across the Commonwealth. We have a very active group in Roanoke, Virginia, the Blue Ridge Coalition, headed up by Catherine Cable-Stromberg. She's a powerful force. She works with all of the local groups in Roanoke, the local chapter of the NAACP, and some other peace groups, to work in her community. We have a group in Charlottesville. We have groups in Hampton Roads. We have groups in Richmond. We have groups in Northern Virginia. And we all work in tandem. We all collaborate, cooperate, and talk to each other. We have a new group in Virginia. It's called the Virginia Moms for Change. You can find them on Instagram. And they're a group of women who said, we've had enough, and we're going to make certain that our voices are heard and that we are going to change minds and change seats. For if you're an elected official and you're not on this issue, be ready to hear from us. So it is necessary to have all voices at the table. Again, I work with a lot of stakeholders, law enforcement, but I work with faith leaders. I work with community leaders. I work with, women who are doing hard work on the ground in their communities who care about the issue and are taking the time to work on it. It's Carol Adams Foundation is a African American police officer who, in her spare time, works with women of color who have been victims of domestic violence.
Wow.
I mean, she's a true hero in the city of Richmond. So there is opportunity everywhere, but we need you. we need more voices and more people getting involved. And I think that November is going to be telltale. Absolutely. I think we need people voting. I think we need people voting on this issue in particular. Please vote on this issue. All the seats in the House are up. All the seats in the Senate are up. And if we maintain our majority in the Senate and we are able to capture a majority in the House, we will get some good legislation passed at the Virginia General Assembly, and we can put some pressure on Governor Youngkin to sign this legislation.
Sure. And I think it's so important that when we have people in office, when we push these people in office, that we give them their flowers, that we let them know if they're doing a good job, yes. that we let them know, that we yes. acknowledge that. So are there any policymakers specifically that have really been advocates and partners in gun violence prevention or gun policy reform? And if so, who are they? And let's give them their flowers now and just say, keep up the good work.
Yeah, I there's so many in the Virginia General Assembly. I've been in the building for, oh golly, how many years now? 16, 17 years. But some champions. One is Senator Jennifer McClellan. She's now Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan. She's carried our budget amendments for years, worked really, really hard to try to get monies, millions of dollars into our communities. She carried a lost and stolen reporting bill for the mayor in the city of Richmond. Delegate Marcia Price from Newport News has been a champion, a longtime champion. Delegate Rip Sullivan from up here in McLean, Virginia yes. has been a champion. Senator Surville is a champion. I'm going to leave somebody out, and they're going to be mad at me. Delegate Marcus Simon has carried bills for us. Delegate Eileen Fillercorn, then Speaker Fillercorn, and she's been a champion from very early on. She was at the Million Mom March. So, there's numerous. Jennifer Wexton, Jennifer Boysko. Senator Boysko carried the safe storage bill, a big, important bill.
Wow. Thank you so much, Martina and Lori, for joining us on the Inside Scoop and talking about this really important discussion. If you want more information on these wonderful ladies, their information will be in the bottom. Click on the link. We'll see you next week on Inside Scoop.